This is an artist who goes by the name 12Drawings. Um, People who are dying of an addiction or a compulsion will often turn to the 12 steps. I wish I could say it was always a happy ending, that they came, they heard what they needed, and that everything went perfectly. What I have found is that's often not true, and it really is frustrating and baffling to all concerned. But having been both through successful and unsuccessful experiences taking people through the 12 steps, I've noticed that they have their own framework for what it is they think they're struggling with. And I've thought a lot about it. And I think the 12 steps work for all of them, but I just wanted to sum up what I have seen as the way that people experience or describe their inner conflicts. And I'll just read the list. And this is in alphabetical order, so this is not at all in order of importance. Some people will speak in terms of there are days when they feel totally at peace, and there are days when they feel like they are at war with themselves. There are days when they feel like they are virtuous, and days when they feel that as if the devil has a hold of them, and they'll use that word. Um, some people will say, I have the strength and the courage to combat my addiction or my compulsion, and then they'll say, well, I completely gave in to my fear, and now I'm back in trouble again. Some people have said it's like there's a childish part of me that just wants to do it, get it over with, even if it harms me. It feels good at the time, whereas there's a more mature part of me that says, yeah, but I know there's more to it than that. I can't just do childish things all the time. In the language of the 12 steps, there's the word power and powerless. Um, it simply means I do have the power to stop some days, but on other days I'm powerless to stop. Some people say, well, my problem is I'm just not educated enough, or I completely understood it when I left the 12-step meeting yesterday at lunch, but then by that night I'd forgotten and gone back to the way I was before. Some people think of it in terms of, I was just completely selfish. I didn't think of my family. I just did what I wanted to, and it was very destructive. There are people who really feel, well, there must be something wrong with me because I love the people in my family, and yet from the way I treat them, you would think that I hate them. There are people who say, well, the truth is I need to stop, but then when I get all alone with myself and my compulsion or addiction, I forget all about the truth and I start believing lies. Other people say, I have found the strength, the faith, the whatever to to resist my compulsion or addiction, and then same person may come back in and say, well, I lost that, whatever that was that I found. Some people will talk about grace, and I mean grace from the divine. They really believe that they have received something precious and priceless from the highest possible source. Other people feel cursed. Maybe they were given grace and somehow another power took it away from them, or they failed to hold on to it and they slid into damnation. Simple good and evil. It's a common way for people to talk about struggles, conflicts. If I were more of an adult about it, I would handle it better than I do, but I have a childishness. Sometimes you'll hear someone with a scientific background talk about the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. A very old science by Dr. Pavlov. You would know him from his Pavlov's dogs experiments. Found that he was able to control dogs through a system of rewards and punishments. And a lot of people think that's what the cycle of addiction and compulsion really is about, is this cycle gone crazy. There's physiological, voluntary and involuntary actions. I was determined not to do it, and yet for some reason it's as if my hands got a mind of their own, and they did what I don't want to do. And that's literally true. I'm not just joking. That's something that people have said to me. Other people will say I'm experiencing a conflict between the body and the mind. It's not unusual. They'll say, I know what I need to do, but my body is just not listening. There are people who talk about managing things. I've learned to manage. I manage my time, my money. I put things where I can't reach them, and yet they come back in and they said I was not able to manage my addiction or compulsion. There are people who work in a very focused way and yet find they lose that focus and become aimless again. There are people who try to work in a very orderly way, and yet their order disintegrates into very destructive and disappointing chaos. There are people who experience absolute ecstasy. They realize something that's wonderful and true, and yet within hours or days, they've re-experienced the agony of being back in their compulsion or addiction. You'll definitely hear religious people talk about the presence and power of God, and then they will lament that not that God stopped existing, but that they went into a state of godlessness. There are people who argue that their addiction or compulsion is a result of high self-esteem or low self-esteem, and that if they could just turn their low self-esteem back into high self-esteem, they would be fine and wouldn't have the problem anymore. There are people who see life, daily life, safe life, family life, following the rules kind of life as being very, very sensible, and yet they feel drawn in strange ways to dangers, dangerous places, dangerous people, dangerous behaviors. There are people who absolutely believe that they had a sufficient willpower that they would be able to stop themselves, and they take the fact that they're not able to stop themselves as proof that they are weak. There are people who say, well, if I would just be considerate of how this has hurt my family, my wife, my parents, my boss, I would stop. So the fact that I can't stop obviously proves that I'm a very inconsiderate person. There are some who say I'm a victim of my past, and yet the problem keeps showing up in their future as well. So it can't just be explained by their past. There are people who are experiencing serenity, and within a matter of time, they're back in the throes of a disturbance again. And then there are people for whom they really, really come to believe that honesty is their solution. If they would just always be honest, that they would recover from their compulsion or addiction. And yet, lo and behold, they may find themselves again doing things that are dishonest and very destructive. Now, you may believe none of this. You may agree with none of this. You might change some or all of these terms. But I have experienced these as being dynamics or common descriptions of how people feel the inner conflicts of addiction and compulsion. There's more at my website, TwelveDrawings.com.